Republican senators succeeded once again in using the legislative filibuster to block the passage of the Paycheck Fairness Act. Now, the legislative filibuster would require, of course, 60 senators to vote in favor of any piece of legislation, which is incredibly difficult to do when the Senate has a 50-50 split among Democrats and Republicans. Kamala Harris serves as the tie-breaking vote. Now, if you're wondering, what the overall vote was on this particular issue, senators voted 49-50 to try to advance the legislation, falling short of the 60 votes needed to overcome the procedural hurdle, meaning the legislative filibuster. Now, if you're wondering why there weren't 50 Democrats voting in favor of the Paycheck Fairness Act, it's because Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat, didn't show. We don't know why. I think it's incredibly strange that she didn't show, considering the fact that she has championed issues pertaining to equality for women, but she just decided not to show. And if we're gonna hold Kirsten Sinema accountable for her inability to show up to work to do her job, I think that it's fair to call out Gillibrand for doing the same. Although I would argue it might even be worse in this case because she's not carrying out actions that go along with what her messaging has been in regard to equality in the workplace. Now, for those of you who are wondering, what are the provisions in this legislation that just got defeated through the legislative filibuster? It's not just about ensuring there's equality in pay based on gender and all of that. It actually has important provisions that affects every single one of us. For instance, the bill would limit employers to bona fide factors such as education, training, and experience when justifying pay differentials in wage discrimination claims. As Senator Patty Murray, a Democrat, said, and I think this is exactly right. Right now, an employer can brush aside reports of pay discrimination by saying things like, well, he was a better negotiator, or they work in different buildings. And then she says, I mean, what does that have to do with it? And that's exactly right. Now, here's the other part of the legislation that's important. Employers would also be prohibited from retaliating against workers who compare salaries and barred from inquiring about prospective employees' salary histories during the hiring process. Okay, so let's stop right there. First off, having the ability to speak with your colleagues, speak with your coworkers about what you're getting paid is an important one to protect, because that's how you find out whether or not there's an unfair pay situation taking place. Now, the second half of that is about salary histories, which is also important. Think about how many millennials graduated into a disastrous economic situation, were unable to find work after graduating from college, and unfortunately were forced to take jobs that paid them far less than what they should have been making. Because of the system we have in place now, where potential employers look at your salary history to make a decision about what you get paid, that unfortunately and unnaturally keeps the pay for people low based on what their starting salary was at their first job out of college. We need to do away with that system. It is not the right system to function under, and it clearly keeps salaries and wages low, thus benefiting employers and putting employees at a giant disadvantage. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about Senator Mitch McConnell, because while Senator Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat, believes that he could definitely work with his Republican colleagues on passing legislation that matters to the Democratic base. I do want you to listen to the rhetoric coming from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who was so offended that this legislation even came up, that he claims that the very nature of it coming up on the Senate floor is a sign that there can't be bipartisanship. Watch.
As you look to what the majority leader has in mind for June, it's pretty clear the era of bipartisanship is over. The majority leader is starting with the so-called Paycheck Fairness bill late this afternoon, which is essentially a giveaway to the plaintiffs' lawyers in America, a series of totally partisan bills designed to get no Republican support. So it looks to me like majority leaders decided that June is kind of the check the box month with all of the extreme left-wing provisions.
There was no age of bipartisanship during the Biden administration. We certainly didn't see that during the Trump administration. Are you kidding me? You think GOP lawmakers had any interest in what Democrats had to say? Certainly in the first 2 years of Trump's administration, they didn't care at all. And so, look, obviously we know that Joe Manchin is not being honest in citing bipartisanship for, his reasoning behind rejecting the calls to end the Senate filibuster, the calls to at least reform the Senate filibuster. We know he's full of it. But I do want to just read a quick comment from one of our members, Eclectic Miscellanea, who writes in quite often, and he makes a really good point here. It depends on how you define bipartisanship. Manchin's not bipartisan about what voters want, and as you guys know, the majority of voters, even in a state like West Virginia, want to pass things like the For the People Act, which is robust election reform. Electic Miscellanea continues to write, Manchin's not bipartisan about what voters want, but what elected officials want. And this is important to keep in mind, guys. I know we focus quite a bit on Manchin, but here's the reality. TYT reported the other day that centrist Democrats are reportedly happy because Manchin is taking the fall for them on a lot of issues they don't want to vote for anyway. Washington Post actually reported on that. There's as many as 10 Senate Democrats who are against important pieces of legislation that they don't have the guts to speak out against publicly because they know it's popular legislation that their own base will retaliate against them on. Now, we know about Manchin, we know about Sinema, but there is a problem. There is a virus that affects every single member, well, almost every single member of Congress, and that's money in politics. The fact that we're dealing with corporate Democrats who have similar corporate donors as Republicans essentially leads us to a situation where on big issues that Americans want to see change on, both parties appear to be very similar, right? When it comes to issues pertaining to the economy, foreign policy, those types of issues, again and again, we see very similar outcomes from Democrats and Republicans. And part of the reason why is because we see that dark money, we see that money in politics corrupting their decision making and obviously influencing what they are and are not willing to fight for as they claim to represent the best interests of Americans. We know that they don't. We know what the reality is, and we have to be hyper focused on the real motivations behind these corporate Democrats. We can't fall victim to what they want us to be distracted by, right? You see culture war narratives on the right. Democrats have their own version of that. They love to pay lip service to disenfranchised groups of people in this country, but they are unwilling to do anything to actually improve the lives of these groups of people. It's all rhetorical nonsense. Don't get distracted by it. Let's keep it real. They want us to focus on that as opposed to the fact that they're not really serving our best interests and they're not fighting for the very policies that they campaigned on.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.